What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Know Your Enemy. My name is TrendKiLL. Let's get into it. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Guardian Geb. Now, if you haven't seen this series before, in today's episode, you're going to be learning a little bit about how to play against Geb should you find him on the enemy team. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at an overview of Geb and his abilities. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the graph of Geb. Now, like a lot of the other Guardians in the game, Geb's defense, utility, and control are fairly high. Now, unlike a lot of the other Guardians in the game, Geb's mobility is also very high. Now, he doesn't have a global presence like an Athena, but that doesn't stop Geb from getting from lane to lane very quickly. Now, because he's high in all of those categories, he's fairly low in damage and has no healing to speak of. So let's go ahead and move into his abilities so we can see why the graph is shaped the way that it is. So for starters, why is his defense so high on that graph? Well, let's take a look at his passive, Hard as Rock. This passive negates 75% of the damage bonus from critical hits, meaning that if somebody's autos are doing 100 damage to you and they should crit for 200, they will now only crit for 125. This helps negate a lot of the damage that hunters and some assassins are going to do late game. So while this passive is not the center of his kit, it is a very, very good passive. His first ability, Rollout, this is the ability that gives him his mobility. Essentially, Geb turns into a large boulder and rolls around the map, unless you're using his Geb 1 skin, in which he turns into a sweet-ass spaceship. Now, for a beginner, this ability can be a little confusing when you read the description, so let's go ahead and break it down into smaller chunks. Essentially, you roll around for a maximum of 6 seconds before the ability ends. Anything that is hit that is not a god, Geb will roll right through them. However, if Geb comes in contact with an enemy god, he stops at the first god hit. Okay, there's one part. The second part is some really bad wording in the middle of the description. It says he increases speed as he travels, his damage scaling from 50% to maximum over 3 seconds. What they're trying to say is that at level 1, Rollout does 100 damage plus 50% of your magical power. However, that is after the 3-second charge up time on Rollout. If you were to hit somebody right as you cast the ability, it will actually do exactly 50% of that damage, or 50 base damage and 25% of your magical power. Anyway, maybe I'm just dumb. I understand how the ability works, but the description of how the ability works felt a little cryptic. And the third part of this that is kind of confusing is that the ability lasts for a full 6 seconds, so he will roll as a boulder for 6 seconds. However, for the first 3 seconds, he's gaining speed until he's at his top speed and top damage. For the remaining 3 seconds of the total 6 seconds, so the second half of Rollout, he becomes CC immune and knocks back any god that he hits. And last but not least, any god that's hit by Rollout is also slowed by 30% for up to 2 seconds at max rank. So now that we've got all of that understood, let's go ahead and move on to his second ability, Shockwave. Now at its core, this is a very simple ability. It's a 45-degree cone ability that has a knockup on it and does a little bit of damage. However, this ability also has a distance-based damage modifier. What that means is, at maximum range, this ability will only do half damage. At point-blank range, this will do the full amount. So it's kind of the opposite of Rollout. In Rollout, to get max damage, you want to make sure you're approximately 3 seconds away from somebody. Whereas Shockwave, you want to be right up close to them. Now this works in both ways because you can roll out to get up to somebody, hit them with the rollout, and then shockwave them for close to max damage on both. Now his third ability, Stone Shield, is really what makes Geb the character that he is. Geb can target himself or anybody on his team and give them a damage shield. Now that shield lasts until it either runs out of time or all of the damage is depleted off the shield. At level 1, it's going to give you a 70 damage shield. However, at level 20, it gives you a 650 damage shield. So at max rank and at level 20, Stone Shield will mitigate 650 damage before it goes away. Now the last part of Stone Shield is the confusing part for new players. It reads, the shield also cleanses any CC when applied. That doesn't mean you're CC immune while you're shielded. That means that it cleanses CC when the shield is applied to you. So let's say you're facing an Amir, and Amir comes up and he's getting ready to freeze you, and Geb shields you before the freeze goes off. Well, the damage from freeze is going to be mitigated by whatever level the shield and Geb are. However, you're still going to be stunned. The reverse way, if Geb waits until you're frozen, he can then shield you to cleanse the stun, but you've already taken the damage from the freeze. So there's two different ways Stone Shield can be used, and that gives this ability a ton of utility, which is why you saw utility high on Geb's graph. The last thing to note is that the shield duration increases from 3 to 5 seconds at rank 1 and rank 5. His last ability, Cataclysm, his ultimate, is a very large AoE damaging stun. If you haven't noticed, a lot of Guardian abilities are large AoE disruption abilities. This large area, almost 2-second stun is no exception. However, this one is a little bit different. Instead of doing a base damage plus a certain percent of your magical power, this ability just does a certain percentage of the target's current health, meaning that this ability will never kill someone. At max rank, this will do 35% of the target's current health. That means that if somebody's at 2,000 health, this ability will do 700 damage to them. However, that also means that if somebody is at 10 health, this will do 3.5 damage to them. This is exactly why Geb was fairly low on the damage portion of the graph. If everyone happens to be at full life and all clustered up to where Geb can hit every one of them, he has the potential to do a lot of damage. However, if Geb happens to come in at the last minute on a team fight and uses his ult while everybody's almost dead, he's not going to do any damage and he's not going to secure any kills. Now, I'm speaking on strictly a damage basis here because him coming in at the end of the team fight to ult the entire enemy's team is great if he's got teammates that are there to follow up with that and help him get the assists. I'm strictly speaking about his ultimate in a vacuum. It alone cannot come in and clean up a team fight like, say, an Amir ultimate can. Alright, so now that we know everything about his abilities, let's go ahead and move into the mechanics section where we can talk about some tips on how to play against a Geb. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into it. One of the first things you need to know about Geb is that, generally speaking, early game he is fairly bad. He's got little to no clear, most of his CC is not utilizable in lane early game, and while his shield does still cleanse CC, it doesn't protect from that much damage early on. If you compare him to somebody like Emir, who can wall you off to stop you from running away, freeze you, and then slow you with his Glacial Strike, you can see that Emir has an insanely more aggressive early game. Somebody like Athena, who can dash in on you and taunt you away from your laning partner, is again more powerful early than Geb is. Now, I wouldn't say he's completely useless. He is going to annoy you with a lot of knockups and protect his partner with shield. However, he's going to play more of a passive role than an active role. He does, however, have very good rotation potential. Moving on to his abilities, let's talk about rollout first. One thing that Geb can do early game, if he happens to be able to work it out, is that he can go into the jungle, sneak out behind you, and roll out to knock you toward his teammate, or knock you into his tower. Now, Geb can do that anytime he wants. However, it is more devastating early game, because if you take a couple tower shots early game when you're not expecting to, you're probably done for. Late game, however, he can greatly put you out of position with rollout, not necessarily to get a kill, but to knock you in to the team so that the team can finish you off. Now, to counterbalance that, it is very easy to dodge because he does not have a very good turning radius while he's rolling. So if you see him coming, it's fairly easy to just walk to the side and not get hit by rollout. Now, Geb's not always going to use that offensively. Sometimes he may try to use that to get away from a fight. If he does that, do remember that the ability is cancelled as soon as it hits an enemy god. So, in the first 3 seconds, if you are to step in front of him, 1, you're going to take less than the full amount of the ability's damage, and 2, you will not get knocked back and he is not CC immune. So if you step in front of him in the first 3 seconds, that essentially negates his escape. Moving on to his second ability, Shockwave, there's not much to say about this. It's a fairly simple ability, but 3 very quick points I want to touch on. 1, Shockwave is extremely easy to hit because it's got a very large cone. 2, it actually goes a lot further than you might think. So in the laning phase, in the early game, he is going to poke you a lot with Shockwave. And 3, remember that Shockwave knocks you up every time it hits you. Now, while it's not a stun or a cripple or a root or something that can be really devastating, if that player playing Geb happens to be in comms or in party with the person that he's laning with, they might be able to work together off that small knockup and CC chain you. Other than that, it's a very basic ability. Obviously, you don't want to be close to him because it does more damage up close, but sometimes that's unavoidable and you're just going to take it anyway. I think that goes for most gods when I say you probably don't want to be too close to them. Now let's talk about Stone Shield for a second. Remember that Geb can use this to cleanse an already stunned or CC'd teammate, or he can use it to provide a damage shield, one or the other. He can't do both. So this is a tip for somebody who's watching this video to learn how to play Geb. Understand that you as a player have to assess the current situation and figure out who you think needs the shield most. Shielding someone to prevent damage keeps them susceptible to crowd control. Shielding someone who's already being crowd controlled to cleanse it obviously means they've already taken the damage from the ability that crowd controlled them. So it's really going to be up to you, the player, to be knowledgeable about the enemies that you're facing and know when the best time to shield is. And the last thing to note about Stone Shield is that it is not temporary health. It is a separate entity, and the only time that will ever come into play is when you're playing somebody with an execute, say Thanatos. If you are below Thanatos' threshold and he dunks down on you, whether you're shielded or not, he is still going to kill you because the shield does not affect your HP. Now on the other side of that, Ao Kuang's execute is a crowd control first, so a well-timed Geb Stone Shield can actually cleanse the grab when Ao Kuang is about to take you up into the air and execute you and prevent you from dying. So Stone Shield can be used in so many different ways. Is your teammate about to get sniped by Ra? Shield him before it happens. Is a mirror getting ready to come up behind your teammate and that teammate has enough health to last through the freeze damage? Shield him after freeze goes off. Does somebody feel safe inside their tower at low health? Shield your teammate, let him jump in and get the kill, and get out before the tower does too much damage to him. And last but not least, his ultimate. I don't have a lot of tips for his ultimate because it's a very generic ultimate. It does do a percentage of health, so understand and remember that this ult will not kill anybody, but it is a very good teamfight ult, if not one of the best Guardian teamfight ultimates in the game. Again, like I said before, if you find a team that is at full health and is all clumped together, this can do an absolutely insane amount of damage and can stun them all for 2 seconds. So, with that all being said, just like most Guardians, you want to watch out for a Geb with Blink. That is a very easy way for him to initiate, to blink in, use his ult, and then use a knock-up afterwards to keep everybody juggled. That's usually enough time for his team to catch up and clean everybody up. Because he's not getting kills, Geb is usually an assist machine, so he's very good at setting up his team for easy kills. So there you have it, guys. Hopefully this video has helped you learn a little bit about how to play against a Geb should you find him on the enemy team. I also hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you come back and check us out next episode when we're going to be talking about Nuwa, the Guardian of Heaven and Earth. Speaking of which, watch till the end. If you're watching the Know Your Enemy series, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you are a new player. If that assumption is correct, there's a very good chance you do not own Nuwa. So go ahead and click the subscribe button now to get access to Nuwa and the Water Dancer skin for free.